Yo, I just picked up the base 13-inch M4 MacBook Air in the new sky blue color, and I can't lie, this isn't what I was expecting. $999, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and 256 gigabytes of storage in this super light blue chassis. I've been using it now for just a couple of days, and while this is by no means a review, this thing is looking really good. So this is Apple's smallest and thinnest MacBook that I think is perfect for students or people who like to travel with their MacBook quite a lot. When I saw this released at $999, which keep in mind is $100 less than last year's MSRP, I was shocked, but it makes what was already an incredibly good value laptop even better. On the outside, this laptop is no different aside from the color from what we've seen in the last 2 generations. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's definitely a pretty laptop with its fairly slim bezels and sleek squared off design. So the thing you're probably wondering the most is what's new and does it warrant an upgrade? Honestly, the changes that we did get were pretty small, but still worth noting. A bigger change with the M4 chip is it now has 2 extra cores in its CPU, going from 8 to 10. Previously, we had 4 efficiency cores and 4 performance cores, but now we have 6 efficiency cores and 4 performance cores. How much this will affect your daily usage comes down to how heavy the work you do is, but frankly, I think where you're going to see the most improvement in this base model is that jump from 8 to 16 gigabytes in RAM. In hindsight, having 8 gigabytes in 2025 is kind of crazy. Sure, for basic web browsing and email, it's great, but trying to edit while having multiple other programs open is where things can start to struggle. I know that's not what this laptop is actually meant for, but it was sad to see such a powerful chip being held back by such little memory. I remember when I was testing the M3 Air, performance-wise it was great, but that RAM would start to slow it down quite a bit if I was trying to do anything outside of Resolve. 16 gigabytes gives you the headroom where you can very comfortably work in multiple creative programs at the same time and not have any significant slowdowns. Now, another improvement with the chip was the memory bandwidth. It's still not close to the M4 Pro, which is 273 gigabytes per second, but at 120 gigabytes per second, it's still a 20 gigabyte jump from last year, which is nice to see. On the RAM side, if you want to, you can now configure this thing up to 32 gigabytes of unified memory. That's up from just 24 previously. If you're into FaceTime or doing video calls, the Mac can also now do center stage and have support for desk view, which basically lets you have an additional camera when you're using FaceTime to serve as an overhead on your desk. The idea is cool, but practically I don't know how useful this is with how distorted the camera gets. It's an interesting feature to use just the MacBook's webcam to give the effect of an overhead cam, but what's probably more useful is using your iPhone as that second webcam. In the marketing, Apple is also mentioning some things about Apple Intelligence being featured on this new MacBook, but frankly, I'm just shocked at how much of a flop this has been for Apple. Not to mention that we don't actually have the updated Siri they showcased last year, but everything they have released is honestly just underwhelming compared to the other AI offerings. When I have something like Raycast AI that gives me access to Claude or GPT models in just a couple of key presses, it gives me little reason to care about this sorry-ass attempt at an LLM. Other than that though, this MacBook remains a pretty iterative year-over-year upgrade. We have the same 2 display options at 13.6 inches and 15.3 inches, with the 2560 by 1664 display on the 13-inch and 2880 by 1854 on the 15-inch. Both of these get up to 500 nits of brightness, which when you look at it next to the 1000 on the MacBook Pro, it is a little darker, but for most use this is fine. The size and weight are also unchanged. You're still getting the 2.7 or 3.3 pound chassis, which still throws me off every time I pick up this machine, especially as it still manages to have an incredible battery life. The battery actually did increase in size ever so slightly. It's 53.8 watts compared to 52.6. The rated battery is about the same though, being 18 hours for video streaming, which is a funny distinction from the 18 hours of Apple TV app movie playback that we saw last year, whatever that means. For basic web browsing, it's about 15 hours, but once you start to do heavier work like editing, in my experience, 6 to 8 hours is where the laptop tends to land. That's still pretty great though, compared to any other Windows laptop at this price point. Now, on the performance side, we did see an uptick in single core and multi-core performance along with GPU performance. I'm going to show you synthetic benchmarks just so there's some easy numbers to compare to, but don't think too deep into them. They don't say that much about your day-to-day performance. That said, compared to the M3 chip, we saw a 23% increase in single core scores, a 25% increase in multi-core scores, and a 20% increase in Metal GPU scores. Now, I just have to mention it, but this new sky blue color that's supposed to be like the clear differentiator for this new MacBook is probably the most sorry ass attempt at blue I have ever seen. Under the right lighting conditions, it looks sexy as hell, but basically at all other times, it's just silver with a couple of blue tints in it. Now, what some of you may still be asking is, when does it make sense to go for the MacBook Pro over this MacBook Air? While I do think that this is a fantastic machine, and honestly, for 80% of people, it's more than enough, there's just still a few features the MacBook Pro has that I just can't live without. First off, an annoying difference is that we still have 2 USB-C ports on the MacBook Air compared to 3 on the MacBook Pro, and these fill up incredibly fast. Having one more doesn't sound like much of a difference, but when you have the HDMI port and SD card slot, that's potentially 1 or 2 dongles that you now don't have to use. There's also the lack of speaker grills, which isn't a huge deal because I mostly use AirPods or wear my Bear Dynamics, but the lack of cutouts on the MacBook Air gives it a very tin can muffled profile that I'm just not a huge fan of. The last difference is ProMotion, which for me is the main deal breaker. I've just been spoiled by it for so long that going back to using a 60Hz display feels a lot less responsive. It's a very subtle difference, but just dragging around windows and moving throughout the Mac feels snappier. Now, the power, of course, is going to be a significant jump between the Air and the Pro, especially as I have the M4 Max here, but frankly, from my experience with Apple Silicon, RAM is really where the difference is made because the base chips already excel in so many tasks. I think that if you're doing heavy graphics works, the Pro and Max chips can show their strength, but honestly, for programming, basic editing, and everyday tasks, the Air excels at a great price. Now, oftentimes when I'm coding, I like to have my iPad at the side so I can sketch out diagrams and flowcharts. Normally, drawing on an iPad isn't as satisfying as paper, that is until you try a screen protector from today's sponsor, Paperlike. I've been using theirs daily for months now, and I'm still surprised just how good it feels. You'd think something like this would be thick, but at just 0.12 millimeters, it's as thin as a human hair and offers precise input. Tiny microbeads called nanodots cover the surface of the screen protector, giving it the texture of premium art paper. These make the Apple Pencil vibrate ever so slightly as to imitate the feedback of a pencil on paper. While Apple's nano texture displays can reduce glare, they don't provide this unique haptic feedback that makes writing feel natural. At the same time though, they're soft enough to avoid damaging the Apple Pencil tip. The nanodots can also reduce glare by letting display light shine around and through the screen protector with minimal refraction. This creates an optimal picture quality that leaves fingerprints and smudges barely visible. If you're a digital artist, designer, student, or anyone who wants to improve their digital writing and drawing experience, Paperlike Screen Protector is a fantastic tool. Paperlike is so confident that you'll love it that they offer a 100-day satisfaction guarantee, meaning that if for any reason you're not happy with it or you botch the application twice, they'll offer a free replacement or refund it within 100 days. So to wrap it up, what's the deal with the M4 MacBook Air? To sum it up, this is the best boring laptop I've ever seen. For $999 or $899 if you're a student, you have a 16GB Mac that's going to handle any app you use it with incredibly well. In a month or so, I'll probably talk more about my experience after using the machine more, but this is definitely a good buy if you've been needing a new computer for some time. If you're on a more recent Mac though, this is another incremental upgrade that you don't need to rush out to get. Let me know what you think down below. By the way, if you know how to edit videos and like the vibe of this channel, I'm looking to hire someone to help make these videos better. This is a remote role, so you can apply from wherever in the world you are, but if you're in the San Francisco area, later this year you'll have the opportunity to work in person with me and help me document some really cool shit I have coming up. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, there's gonna be a link down in the description where you can apply. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, you'll wanna watch this one next where I go through the entire process of setting up a new MacBook. Thanks for watching and take care.